April 18, 1942. The Pacific was quiet, cold, and endless. A light wind cut across the steel deck of the USS Hornet CV-8, and every man aboard understood one thing. What was about to happen had never been attempted in the history of war. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers stood chained to the deck, their wings stretched wide, their engines silent, their crews waiting. These aircraft were never meant to take off from an aircraft carrier. They were medium bombers built for long runways, not the short, violent deck of a warship pitching in rough ocean swells. Yet 80 volunteers stood beside them, preparing for a mission no one expected them to return from. At the center of it all was Lieutenant Colonel James Harold "Jimmy" Doolittle, pilot, mechanical genius, aviation pioneer, and a man who understood that war was not only fought with weapons, but with belief. After Pearl Harbor, the United States was still reeling. The Philippines was collapsing. Singapore had fallen. Wake Island was gone. Japan seemed invincible, expanding across Asia and the Pacific like a tide that could not be stopped. The American public was desperate for hope. Roosevelt needed something, anything that could deliver a message to both allies and enemies. America could strike back. The Doolittle raid was born not from strategy, but from necessity. And yet behind every plan lay danger. The B-25s had been stripped of defensive guns to carry extra fuel. Their tails carried mock wooden broomsticks painted black, a desperate bluff to imitate heavy .50 caliber turrets. Every gallon on board had been calculated. There was no return, no landing on the carrier. Their only chance was to bomb Japan, then fly west into China, and hope they had enough fuel and luck to survive. At 0738 hours, after a Japanese picket boat detected the task force earlier than expected, Admiral Halsey gave the order. "Launch the bombers!" Doolittle climbed into his cockpit, adjusted his gloves, and looked ahead at 60 feet of steel runway and open ocean beyond. Engines roared. The ship turned into the wind. The world held its breath. With a final throttle push, Doolittle's bomber rolled forward, wheels bouncing, nose lifting, and then, almost impossibly, it cleared the edge of the deck and soared into the gray morning sky. One by one, the remaining aircraft followed, each takeoff a near disaster, each flight a gamble with death. Behind them, sailors lined the rails in silence, watching history take flight. Hours later, as dense cloud and mist parted, the mountains and coastline of Japan emerged beneath the bombers, silent, unaware, unprepared. And then, sirens, the first air raid alarms Tokyo had heard in modern history. Anti-aircraft guns awoke, shells burst across the sky, and Japanese fighter pilots scrambled in confusion. Down below, civilians looked up in disbelief. For months they had been told America was weak, broken, incapable of striking back. Yet now, American bombers thundered overhead. Doolittle targeted an industrial zone. Bomb bays opened, and the first American bombs to strike the Japanese homeland fell into the heart of Tokyo. The physical destruction was limited, but psychologically it was devastating. More aircraft hit Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, Yokosuka, shipyards, fuel depots, factories. Across the nation, fear spread. If America could strike once, it could strike again. Japan's military and political leadership reacted with shock. Their war planners had assured them such a raid was impossible, that the Pacific was too vast, that the Americans were too wounded to fight. But the sight of the rising sun homeland under attack shattered that illusion. The raid lasted only minutes, Yet the message echoed across the world. As the bombers turned west toward China, fuel gauges dropped dangerously low. Japan lay behind them, and a vast, storm-soaked darkness lay ahead. Each man understood one brutal truth: none would reach a runway. One crew bailed out over the sea. Another crashed into rugged mountain terrain. Men parachuted into darkness, rain, and uncertainty, not knowing whether they would land among allies, allies betrayed under threat of execution, or enemy patrols waiting in the shadows. Chinese civilians, farmers, villagers, resistance fighters, many risked their lives to help the Americans. Their kindness came with a cost. Infuriated by the humiliation, the Japanese Imperial Army launched a ruthless campaign across Chinese provinces suspected of helping the raiders. Entire towns were burned, thousands executed. War had consequences, even for those far from the battlefield. For some raiders, rescue came quickly. Others wandered for days, injured, starving, exhausted, until help found them. But 8 men were captured. They were beaten, interrogated, and held in isolation, their fate uncertain. Eventually, 3, Lieutenants Dean Hallmark, William Farrow, and Harold Spatz, were sentenced to death and executed by firing squad. Another airman, Lieutenant Robert J. Meader, died in captivity from starvation and disease. The remaining 4 endured years of torture and isolation before finally being liberated in 1945. Meanwhile, in the United States, the mission was declared a success, and news of the raid electrified the nation. Jimmy Doolittle returned home expecting a court-martial for losing all 16 aircraft. Instead, he received the Medal of Honor. The raid changed far more than morale. In Japan, the psychological shock forced a strategic shift. The Imperial Navy, enraged and embarrassed, sought to expand its defensive perimeter further east to eliminate the threat permanently. Their target, a small coral atoll halfway between Asia and North America, Midway. Japan believed that by luring the American fleet into a decisive naval trap, they could destroy U.S. carriers and regain the illusion of invincibility. But they were wrong. Because of the Doolittle raid, Japan made a decision driven not by strategy, but by pride. And pride is a dangerous general. On June 4, 1942, less than 2 months after the Tokyo raid, 4 Japanese carriers that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor sailed into battle expecting an easy victory. But U.S. codebreakers had already uncovered their plan. And at Midway, fate reversed. American dive bombers struck with precision. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the pride of the Imperial Navy, burned, exploded, and sank into the sea. Japan's expansion halted, its offensive momentum died, and the Pacific War shifted permanently onto the path that would eventually lead to Allied victory. The Doolittle raid did not win the war, but it changed its direction. It forced Japan into a reckless gamble. It bought time. It restored American confidence. And it reminded the world that even in the darkest moment of war, hope can take flight. Years turned to decades. The raiders grew older. Many built families, lived quietly, and carried memories they rarely spoke aloud. Others wrestled with nightmares. The crash, the captivity, the loss of brothers. But every April 18th they gathered. At each reunion sat a case of 80 silver goblets, one engraved for every man. When a raider passed, his goblet was turned upside down, a silent farewell, a tribute to courage. One by one the goblets inverted, until only a few remained upright. In 2013, the last surviving raiders, frail, aging, but still proud, raised a final toast to their fallen brothers. Their words were simple: to those who are gone, to those who went first, and to the mission that shaped us. Today, none remain, but the legacy of April 18, 1942 lives on in history, in memory, and in the reminder that sometimes courage is not the certainty of success, but the willingness to act when failure seems guaranteed. The Doolittle raid proved that even a single daring strike can break the illusion of invincibility and change the destiny of a war. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WW2 Records as we continue bringing these forgotten chapters of history back to life.